What do you do when your students come unprepared to understand some of the basics in your class? Welcome to the Reach Every Student podcast with me, your host, John Bergman. That is the topic of today. Recently, I had like a terrible aha moment when I was working with my geology students that they didn't understand basic geography, right? I was talking about, well, in South America, where the Andes Mountains are, there's this type of feature. There's these mountains, the Andes Mountains, and they're caused by this type of a plate tectonic motion. This is where you find volcanoes. And I had my students, for example, they were cutting out, this was the moment, they were cutting out different continents to kind of show that there was once a supercontinent called Pangea. And one young lady said, "Where's Africa?" And I thought, "Wait a second. She doesn't know what the shape of Africa is?" And then as I dug deeper, not just with that student, with some other students, I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to be spending an entire year teaching them about geologic concepts. And we're going to talk about different places on the earth where you see a particular geologic concept and they don't have a basic understanding of geography. They don't know where Africa is. They don't know where North America, some of them. Oh my gosh. And so I said, what do I need to do? Because I need to just totally backpedal and redo what I've done. So what did I do? I said, all right. Welcome to my class. You guys have just learned that you're going to have to do a geography test. So I sat down, found a world map online. This took forever, by the way. A world map, and I then said, here are 51 places that you need to know on the earth, kind of important geological things, and also just, I think, things they just should know, like, where is Colombia and Brazil and South Africa and India and Japan and Australia and Indonesia and all these places, and bodies of water, the Pacific Ocean, the Atlantic Ocean, the Caspian Sea, the North Sea, all these places, and they had to then take a mastery test. So here was the test, and they were, oh my gosh, did they whine. So I said, I'm going to give you a map with a bunch of numbers on it, and you're going to literally write old school, no computerized do jobber. You're going to write down the names of each of these places. And they said, well, Mr. Bergman, I need a word bank. I need a word bank. I said, no word bank. And to top it off, all right, this is the crazy thing. I said, you have to get at least a 95%. So they had to get, 50-point question, test, whatever. I said, you can only miss 3, which is a bit of a fudge. It's really 2.5. But so I said, you could only miss 3. If you miss 4, you take it over and over and over again, a mastery test, because they really can't proceed if they don't just know cold where these places are. And there's been an interesting development in the world of AI, or there was a paper written some time ago, and in that paper, they talked about just the value of memorization and knowing stuff, and how a de-emphasis on knowing lots of facts diminished the chances that a student really could, cognitively move on. It's, when I was a kid, again, I'm an old teacher, right? 61 years old. When I was a kid, I had to memorize all these places on the map. I had to memorize my times tables, as we said it. And I think we've lost some of that by not insisting that our students memorize certain sort of foundational facts so that it is just there, quick recall in their head. And so I've pivoted, and now I've realized that there's this gap in my students' knowledge, and I'm going to fix it as much as I can. Combat ignorance, and that's what I'm doing. And so they are now taking their test over, some of them over and over again. By the way, I was very encouraged by a number of the students. I would say 2/3 of my students on their first attempt only missed 3. That was great. Now I have students doing the retake, and slowly we're working with the students who struggle to help them know where things are on a map. And it's working. In fact, one thing I'm going to do, again, a master tip, big tip for you guys, is I'm going to test this over and over again. So whenever I have a test, my tests are done on computer. I've talked about this previously in the podcast, where it pulls random questions from test banks. And so I created a 51-point question. It's like a 51, I think, 51 question bank. And on the next test, which is next week, that they take their mastery test, they're going to get pitched 5 random ones. Now, one kid might get number 1, number 5, number 20, and number 51, and another kid's going to get a different set of those places. So that means they have to know all their places throughout the year. And if I would have been more thoughtful, and actually I've done this since then, I told them there's these 51 places, and then I began to say, wait, I think there's still a few more they need to know. For example, I didn't ask them where is the Andes Mountains and where are the Himalayan mountains, because I just did India and Brazil and Peru, which are kind of where they are close to. And I thought, oh, I need to expand my list. So for next year, I have expanded the list to 75 places they need to understand, because it's again foundational knowledge. And I know this. I should know this. I'm an old teacher. I should know that there's the background knowledge is so important when they walk into the class. And maybe that's something to do. Maybe you're a math teacher and there's like you're teaching algebra and there's a certain concept in arithmetic that they don't understand. And how do you make sure they have that? And so I think just this constant, if there's a few key things that you know they have to know, then just continually holding them accountable is going to really help. We did this in my chemistry class. There's a certain foundational concept about naming. If you're not a chemistry teacher, this is going to be like big fancy words. Nomenclature of common chemicals, and it's a difficult concept for kids to understand. And so once we taught it, it was like unit 2 or something like that. What we would do is we would give them a test, and in every test, and regardless of the topic, they'd get 2 or 3 questions on that topic, so that it would just continually reinforce those key foundational concepts that it's just easy memorization stuff, but they have to just know this code to speak the language, right? If we're going to talk the language of geology, they need to have a working knowledge of geography. And I'm not sure what that is in your class. What is it in your class that's that foundational knowledge that you need to continually to retest and retest? But I bet there's something that you just know they need to know. And so my tip for you today is to continually retest those things throughout the course of your course, and for my case, throughout the course of the year. So, hey, I hope you learned from my mistakes, because, yeah, you'd think I'd have learned it after 40 years. I did not, and I needed to. And so this podcast is about pivoting to enhance student learning. I hope this helps you. Please, if you like this podcast, share it with your friends and do the subscribe thing. Have a great day and go out and reach every student.